Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a really tough story today based on the sources you shared. Lots of reports, news coverage, looking at that awful event in Leland, Mississippi back in the fall of 2025.
Yeah, so our focus is Leland, a small community just, well, devastated after what should have been a happy time high school homecoming. We're going to try and give you the clearest picture possible,
Yeah.
the timeline, the human side of it, and where things stand legally. It's about getting the facts straight quickly but thoroughly. Okay, let's unpack this.
Absolutely. And when we talk about Leland, you really have to picture it. It's a small city, Washington County, Mississippi Delta. And in places like this, homecoming isn't just a game, it's a huge community event. So the core of this deep dive, I think, is that jarring contrast, this moment of expected celebration flipping instantly into just unimaginable violence. The shockwaves from that are still being felt. Okay, let's nail down the timeline then. It started late Friday, October 10th, going into the early morning of Saturday the 11th, 2025. And like you said, not out of the blue, it followed right after the big community event. The homecoming game had finished. People moved like they do towards downtown. Sources point to Main Street, a block party kind of atmosphere, crowded, celebratory, and then just after midnight, the shooting starts. It's just, hard to wrap your head around that shift.
And the scale of it, especially for a small town gathering, it's staggering. The sources we looked at consistently ranked this among the deadliest mass shootings in the U.S. for 2025. We have to state the awful toll clearly. 7 people died because of the gunfire. It was horrific right from the start. 4 people were dead right there on the scene.
Right there on Main Street.
Exactly. Then another 3 people sadly passed away later in the hospital from their injuries. And you mentioned the wounded. Reports vary slightly, but it's somewhere between 18 and maybe 25 people hit by bullets, plus others injured just in the chaos, the panic.
That detail, the 4 at the scene and 3 later, it really speaks to how intense the violence must have been right there in that small area. And the severity of the injuries, too.
Oh, absolutely. The number of casualties strongly suggests, a very concentrated burst of gunfire in a place packed with people. And what's, well, not fascinating, but maybe clinically striking, is that authorities are saying this all stemmed from a disagreement.
Just a disagreement?
Apparently. A disagreement after the game. For that to escalate so quickly to, 7 dead and dozens injured, it's incredibly sobering. Shows how fast things can turn catastrophic when guns are involved in disputes.
Yeah, that word disagreement feels inadequate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which brings us to the human cost, beyond the numbers. We need to pause on who was lost here. These were real people, part of that community fabric. The ages really show who was there, It wasn't just one group. We have Orshama Johnson, 41, Jamichael Jones, 34, part of the established community.
Right.
Then younger adults, Shelbyona Powell, 25, and Ebony Williams, also 25, who died later. And then, this is where it gets really hard. The high school connection is so direct. Calvin Plant, 19, Caslin Johnson, 18, Amos Brantley Jr., also 18, teenagers.
Losing 3 young people like that, basically kids, right around homecoming. It's just a gut punch to the whole town. Its future, its sense of self. In a place like Leland, these aren't strangers. You know these families. The loss feels incredibly personal and collective.
It wasn't random violence far away. It was right there downtown during a celebration.
Exactly. And the witness accounts really drive that home. One quote that stood out from the sources was someone calling it the most horrific scene I'd ever seen. Just imagine that feeling of safety, of community celebration, shattered in an instant. That kind of trauma. In a small Delta town, it runs deep.
So let's shift to the investigation and the legal side. Understandably, things moved fast, and it became a big operation.
Yeah, the sources show it wasn't just local police. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, the MBI, they came in. The FBI, too. A major response. And they've made arrests at least 9 people, last we checked, which suggests this wasn't just one shooter.
Right. 9 arrests point to a really complex situation. Multiple people potentially involved. And law enforcement's still asking for tips, which means they're building their case carefully, piece by piece.
And speaking of the case, the charges are incredibly serious. Several suspects are facing capital murder in Mississippi. That's the ultimate charge. Death penalty or life without parole are on the table. So how does that work? You have this massive charge, capital murder, but the official line on motive is still just a disagreement. Does that make the prosecution harder, or does the sheer number of victims just override the why in these situations? That's a really sharp question. And it's kind of the core of the legal strategy here, I think. When you have this many fatalities, the outcome becomes the overwhelming factor legally. Motive matters for things like premeditation, sure, but firing into a crowd causing mass death, Prosecutors can argue that action itself shows such an extreme indifference to human life that it meets the standard for capital murder, even if the initial trigger was, comparatively minor.
So the act itself implies the necessary intent for the charge.
Largely, yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, pursuing capital murder sends a very strong message about accountability. It says the state views this outcome, regardless of the spark, as being as serious as a planned attack.
Even with the disagreement explanation.
Right. That explanation sparked by a disagreement, it's vague, but it might actually serve a purpose legally. It acknowledges something happened first, but it doesn't stop prosecutors from focusing on the deadly actions that followed. The defense, of course, will likely argue it was reckless, maybe not capital-level intent, but that's a very tough argument with 7 deaths. And it really raises an important question, doesn't it? What allows a simple argument to just explode like that?
Yeah.
The availability of firearms in that situation is the terrifying variable.
Yeah. And the impact goes way beyond the courtroom. Back in Leland, the immediate aftermath must have been pure trauma for the whole city. Officials definitely recognized that. This wasn't just a crime scene, it was a tear in the community's sense of safety, especially in a smaller place where maybe you don't expect this scale of violence.
Yeah.
And they took immediate steps. Curfews. That's pretty drastic, right? Imposing curfews, asking everyone for cooperation. It shows they were trying to regain control, prevent more violence, maybe retaliation. The whole town's focus just snapped from celebrating to crisis mode.
Yeah, a curfew. That's something you usually see with major unrest or disasters. It tells you how seriously authorities viewed the threat to basic public order. The community basically had to shift into survival and recovery mode overnight.
It's a stark picture.
And this event, sadly, fits into those larger, painful conversations we come having in the U.S. about gun violence, about community safety. When it happens like this, so suddenly, in a familiar place like Main Street during homecoming, the shock is deeper, the recovery harder. You asked about the disagreement motive. How does a town heal when their central gathering spot is marked by this kind of loss and the explanation feels so incomplete? And now you have state and federal investigators everywhere. It changes the feel of the place.
Turns the familiar into something potentially threatening. Dealing with grief, this huge investigation, these major charges, all stemming from an argument, it's a lot to process. So what does this all mean? Wrapping up. We've looked at a truly horrific event in Leland. A homecoming celebration turned into a mass casualty incident. The key facts. 7 people lost their lives, teenagers, older residents, a whole cross-section. A major law enforcement response led to at least 9 arrests. And the legal system is pursuing the most serious charge possible, capital murder. Yet the official why still hangs there, a disagreement.
Yeah, the investigation is far from over, clearly. Seeking justice for those killed and injured, that's going to be the focus for a long time. And for you, listening, maybe the thing to think about as this moves forward is that very disconnect we just discussed. You have the absolute severity of the legal response, capital murder, and then you have the almost mundane explanation offered so far, a disagreement. What does that gap do to a small town trying to heal? When the why feels so unresolved, even as the consequences are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, how do people find real closure? That's the tough question left hanging.